I would encourage us to think about 3 different levels of protection, so to speak, for our boys, the 3 R's. The first is relationship, the second is routines, and the third is routers. So the first, relationship and beauty, just to revisit that very quickly, it is impossible for us to keep evil completely out. It's not going to happen. But what we can do is fill our sons with love, with reading, with music, with play. Apparently NASA, when you apply to work at NASA, one of the things that they ask you is how you played as a young child, which is fascinating. Routine. Some of this is here to protect our boys. A lot of it, maybe even most of it, is here to model for our sons how they ought to behave. And then finally, routers, filters, and devices, right? What are these things that we can put in place to keep the wolves out, right? We can do our best to keep the wolves out. That doesn't mean that every once in a while the fox isn't going to get in and take a chicken, right? That happens, and that's okay. And we can fortify, we can patch up, we can have conversations with the chickens about why it's a bad idea to play with foxes. But you know, we would be a bit irresponsible if we didn't try in some way, shape, or form to protect our flock. All right, so what is this that we're presenting here? I would think of it in terms of a prudential on-ramp, right? How do we accompany our sons in their slowly increasing use of technology for noble purposes in a way that's fitting to their capacity, to their age, and to their ability for self-mastery? So the method of the research that was conducted is basically my time in the classroom with many of your wonderful sons, my time talking to incredible teachers about how they relate to their boys and their boys' experiences, a great many family interviews run as part of the admissions process, and then most importantly, I think conversations with parents whose opinions I truly value and who I have needed in the past to help me guide my own children through this wonderful process. So I'm going to break this next section down into a couple of parts. One is going to be basically, again, the routines, and then later routers, filters, and devices, and all the rest of it. With regard to routines, I do think it's helpful to think about lower schoolers and middle schoolers as their own group, and then we can think about the upper schoolers as their own batch. And even within that upper school environment, it's interesting to really ask ourselves, who made the decision that 9 through 12, that's really the grade that best corresponds to an adolescent's development? I would encourage us maybe think a bit more broadly. Maybe there's something about 9 and 10 that's specifically unique, and there's a different set of circumstances that apply to 11 and 12. In other countries, Spain, for example, the top layer of high school, or upper school, is actually 11 and 12. Many countries have different structures. So I think it's okay for us to think outside the box. We are the Heights, after all. Okay, for our lower and our middle schoolers, let's get into the routines, right? These are the patterns. These are the virtues that we as parents can live with our own technology, with our families. In general, what I have found from talking to a great many families, no family did the exact same thing as any other family that I talked to. Every single family had its own approach, which I think is dignum et justum est, is right and just, because our children are different, our backgrounds are different, our houses are different, our tech ability is different. So it would actually be totally irresponsible for me to just kind of present an 8.5 by 11 saying, here you go, this is what you got to do, because it really wouldn't work. And so much of the goodness actually comes from that shared discussion that we have as a community about how to protect our kids. So we wouldn't want to short circuit that process either. Okay, lower school and middle school, the routines. In general, smart phones of any type and smartphones as well do not typically, were not encouraged. I should just say never. In the lower school and in the middle school. They typically, the folks that I talk to, do not happen. The one exception to that would be if a child is heading off to a soccer practice that's far away, or maybe going to a tournament, perhaps they can use the family flip phone. So that's something that I have seen. Video games is never, and then I kind of just wrote in almost never, but very, very rarely. Typically, these homes that I've spoken to are places where the kids are allowed to be bored, and then they go outside and they do marvelous things. If you'd like to learn more about that, I encourage you to read either Glow Kids, the book that I just recommended, or another one by Dr. Leonard Sachs called Boys Adrift. There is just countless information on how damaging video games can be towards one's capacity for attention and imagination, which are two things that you need for conversation, which is something that you need for a relationship, which is something you need for marriage, and that we need our children to have so we can have grandchildren. Social media is a never in lower school and in middle school. From all the families that I talked to, that was across the board a never with an exclamation point. Email is something that started to be introduced when the kids hit middle school, depending on the family and the parents' comfort with technology. Always for a purpose. I remember when AOL first came out, we would, log in and kind of, surf the web because it's this new, really cool tool. That typically does not happen anymore with Gmail for our middle school children in the homes that I spoke to. Email is a tool that can be used to communicate with people that we love, and it's used for that purpose. Finally, we get to the question of computers. I'd encourage you to listen to, there's a podcast that John Beatty recorded on our school's podcast about introducing our young sons to the internet. I think it's quite good. With computers, the no-brainers. They're in a public place and they are filtered. John goes into more details. When your children are very, very young, good thing to be right there at their side, right when they're hopping online, to log them in, to sit with them as they're researching whatever on Wikipedia or wherever else. But we have filters. We let them log in on our username credentials. Our children, our young children, are never on the computer alone, and we kill the Wi-Fi at night. House-wide, it shuts down. When our middle school young children are on the computer, it is always for a purpose, never to surf, always for a purpose. Perhaps we're learning to type on Typing Club. Perhaps they're learning how to code. Maybe they're communicating with somebody who needs to be communicated with, but they are not surfing, and especially not surfing YouTube. YouTube can be an incredible place to learn how to play guitar, how to fix your sink, how to do all sorts of incredible things. And it's a great tool to sit with your child as he or she, right, learns about whatever random thing they're interested in. It is not a place where you want your child to just swim, even if you have restricted mode on, because the ideological pressures that are being brought to bear on our young people through YouTube, even when it's on that restricted mode, are very, very difficult. So YouTube, great tool when you're there with them. Finally, just to kind of reiterate that point that I made a bit ago, a dear friend of mine, an MIT computer science PhD, he's building a computer with his boy, and he encouraged us all to view computers not as vehicles for consumption, but rather for creation. Right? And so even with our computers, we can have this sense of, okay, let's learn how this thing works, how things work generally. And that mentality over time can really make computers a place of a lot of excitement and growth. Okay, so then we get to the upper school, and this is where things get interesting, more interesting. Again, and note the difference between that 9th and 10th grade and the junior year and the senior year. And once again, relationship is most important. 2, none of us are going to do this the same way as everybody else. So really, really important. But here we go. Computers, always in a public place. Almost never in the bedroom. This can get complicated sometimes when our older boys, if we live in a small house, for example, if our older boys have homework, and it's really hard for a junior in high school or a senior who's working on his law school or his college application essays, it's hard to do that right in the dining room table with footballs flying around. So if there is a computer in the bedroom, the computer is filtered, the child's back is to the door, and the door is open, but that's the one exception. Chromebooks have been known to be helpful to parents who want to allow their children some more discretion or a bit more freedom in the internet. The family link function on Chromebooks can be really good, can be helpful. The million-dollar question: when to buy a smartphone? So this is a really interesting, and again, I don't want to just say, well, this is the time, because it depends entirely on you, your spouse, your children, their capacity for self-mastery, and the things that are happening all around us. So I can't tell you what you should do. What I can share is, here is some of what I have seen done, and very well. In the 9th and 10th grade, in general, boys are, from the families that I've talked to, are not getting smartphones. If they are getting phones, and I should say if, because it's still possible in the 9th grade not to have a phone. One family just over and over said, you cannot get rid of your landline. Do not get rid of your landline. So hang on to your landlines, folks. That makes it easier to say no to the smartphone. If a ninth or 10th grader was given a phone, usually it was an old flip phone. Perhaps it was a light phone, which is what we started our daughters on when they were in ninth grade, a gab phone, or a pinwheel. So just a couple of details on those things. There's a lot. I would say, again, Protect Young Eyes is a great website with a ton of information about all these things. So what is the light phone, the gab phone, the pinwheel? The light phone, think about kind of the New York hedge fund manager who's very sleek and has, every minute of his time is worth millions. That guy might have, or gal, might have a light phone. The light phone is very simple. It's very small. There's talk and text, and that is all you got. There are no pictures. There's no emojis even on the light phone. So we use that for our kids when they were in ninth grade, starting to go out into the big bad world and all the rest of it, the big wonderful world. And they took their light phones with them. But a good number of families had flip phones that they used. A lot of families recently have been using the gab phone, which is it's a feature phone that allows your children to take pictures, to text, but there's no browser and there's no social media. So the gab phone is there. Now, the other phone that I want to introduce this afternoon, is the pinwheel. And I think the pinwheel really, it might be the phone that we've all been waiting for, many of us. And actually, I was just approached by a parent in the stairwell asking, really encouraging me to emphasize how great the pinwheel has been. Why is the pinwheel great? The Gab does not have a lot of the apps that our sons actually need to do some pretty cool things, right? I don't know when the last time that I saw my teenage kids carrying cash was. It's increasingly a cashless world. So kids today, a lot of them use Venmo. There's other great apps that our children will need, oftentimes, especially as they hit 11th, 12th grade. Pinwheel is interesting because it has a list of curated apps that you as a parent can download onto your son's phone, right? And there's different levels of warnings about what might be possible in this app, but it will give you the freedom to give your child the ability to text if you would like that, to give him the map, give him Venmo, give him all sorts of apps that really many of us are using now for very good purposes. The two things that are not available on Pinwheel are a browser and social media. So those two things are not available on Pinwheel. But that is generally what I saw from 9th and 10th grade families. In 11th and 12th grade, that's when you started to see families begin to share smartphones with their sons. Now, when is your son ready for this? I encourage you here to listen to a podcast that Alvaro recorded titled, When is Your Son Ready for a Smartphone? Very creatively. And in that, just a very brief summary, the question is not, is there a want for this incredibly powerful technology? The question is there a need, right? So what does a smartphone give you, son, that the Pinwheel doesn't, that you need, right? Or just generally, what does a smartphone give you that you need, right? Is there an actual need of that thing? And then, do you have the requisite maturity to handle that powerful technology? That means, by implication, there will be times where our sons have an authentic need, right? A legitimate need. But if they're lacking in the maturity, then it'd be an injustice to them to give them that technology. So that's a really good podcast. I've listened to it a couple times for my own kids. If you should choose to give your child a smartphone, I really, really encourage you to watch a couple of movies. The first is The Social Dilemma. You can watch that with your son. It's an inside, behind-the-scenes look at the social media companies and their efforts to maximize your time on site and your son's. The other one that I would encourage you to watch is Childhood 2.0. This is one that I would not watch with your sons because it has images in it that I would not want my sons to see. However, if your son were to watch Childhood 2.0 and he then gets a phone, he's probably going to see worse things on his iPhone. So maybe it's a wash. But either way, it's a really, really good way for us to understand what is this digital ecosystem that we are flirting with here. These families that are allowing their sons in 11th to 12th grade to get their first smartphone, not their first phone, but their first smartphone, oftentimes they link these to really interesting benchmarks. And I'll just share some of those. When you get your driver's license and you're driving, you can have a smartphone because you need a map and all the rest of it. Another one that I really liked, once you finish your college applications, you can have a smartphone. That was pretty cool. some families, when you go away to college, you can have a smartphone if that's what you like. So all different ways to approach this issue. Again, there's no one approach, but that's what makes it so fun and makes it important for us to hang out together and have refreshments. As you're picking your child's smartphone, we have, obviously the big two. It's iPhones and Androids. One family pointed out, and I think this is right, I hadn't thought about it, but the iPhones, there's something about the iPhone that's just intrinsically more addictive. And so that one of their sons actually opted for an Android phone because he found it to be less addictive, less engaging. On both the iPhone and the Android, you have systems set up to help you monitor your son's use. Both are fine, but both can be very, very easily beaten. It doesn't mean that you don't set them up and they can just kind of help you accompany your boy, but don't assume that just because you have Family Link or just because you've got screen time that the phone is somehow bomb-proof. Of course, there has to be a place for freedom, right? So this is one of those where we can accompany our sons. All right, miscellaneous comments here. Whose phone is this? There's two approaches. One is many families have the boy buy his own phone, right? Make him pay for his phone. Others will buy the phone for their son, but make it very clear, and in fact, either way, this is our phone that we bought you, or this is our phone that we allowed you to buy for yourself, but it's ours. We are permitting you to use it. Either way, parents, every parent I talked to had the passwords for their son's phones and made it abundantly clear when these wonderful devices were first bestowed that the phones were to be checked by the parents whenever we feel like it, for no reason whatsoever. And one parent very intelligently put out that you can almost see in that moment when you ask your son to check his phone, you almost see in that split second everything you need to know, right? If it's like sure, here you go, it's like, okay, things are probably going well. But if you kind of see the deer in the headlights, it might be time for some of that accompaniment. What else? Generally, in most of these families, there was no browser on the phones. A couple of families with juniors, and seniors, there might be a browser on the phone, but with a filter of some sort or another. But generally, a few families I talked to said no browsers until their senior year or college. So all of this necessitates a lot of very difficult, conversations, just like Alvaro hinted at. So I love books. One that I'll recommend, with kind of a cheesy title, but I think it's priceless. The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers gives us a lot of guidance as we say no or not yet to our sons, because you will hear things and feelings that you've got to affirm and validate, but you cannot cave if your prudence dictates to you that you shouldn't. I love the idea that Mr. Gleason threw out of helping our sons develop their own rules for cell phone use. This is a great idea. In the end, this feeds into some sort of a contract or some sort of understanding, clear expectations. Some websites advocate for a written contract. I think there are some families that have done that. But what that doesn't account for is the fact that our boys, if the thing works, the contract will soon be outdated, right? They've got to grow, and the contract has to be loosened. And so there's something about a verbal agreement that allows for more of that growth over time. With regard to the cell phones, location, never in the bedroom, ever. Second rule of location, never in the bedroom. Third rule, never at the dinner table while you're having dinner. Fourth rule, cars are for conversation. Obviously, if you're heading somewhere and you need an address, then you pick up the phone and get the address. But in general, cars are for conversation, for talking, for engagement. As parents, that one is particularly hard for us, right? Because this is 15 minutes, we're going somewhere, and this is our time to crank through texts or do whatever we got to do. But what kind of example do we set when we dive into our devices, and then we look back, we see our child on their device, we say, hey, put that phone away, talk to your sibling. Another really interesting one, and this is one where families are very creative, where do you want your son to be using his cell phone? So some families have just opted for the kitchen, right? The kitchen is the one place where the cell phone lives. You get home, you plug it in, and if you want to talk or text, you do it in the kitchen. Another family, I know 2, have that location in their bedroom, right? So if their kids want to talk or text, they go to the bedroom, they do it there. A lot of different ways to approach that. The timing on the iPhone is interesting, right? So in general, we try to wake up before our devices. That means that our kids have to have a different alarm clock. I heard one family said that they can first check their phone after they're ready for school, which I thought was genius and actually made life much easier in my own home. And then the other rule is put the device to bed before you go to bed. And so that, some parent discretion there, right? Are our phones going to bed at 8 o'clock? The science is probably all in favor of 8 o'clock with blue light and all the rest of it. 9 o'clock, a lot of families settled for 9. Some families settled for 10. But in general, there's a time at which you actually power down the phone. You don't just put it down, because then you can walk past it and pick it up and do the quick check. You power it down. You say, good night. But Mom, my homework, I got this homework assignment or a party I'm going, use a landline. Use a landline. The landline's there for you. As far as screen time limits, one of our lacrosse coaches, I always heard him saying, KYP, know your personnel. So this is one where families are all over the map. Some families have no screen time limits because, and by that I mean the iPhone function of allowing you to limit how much time your children spend on different applications or devices. Some families just want to walk that with their child, and if you have, the stronger the relationship you have with your child, the better your odds of success are in that endeavor. Some families might limit texting to 30 minutes a day. Totally depends on you and how you would like to raise your son, really. There is a rhythm of work and rest, and a lot of these points I'm pulling from a book that I read, but a lot of these points were then confirmed by so many conversations with Heights families. So the rhythm of work and rest, one is that every day there's a tech-free hour. In general, that's the dinner hour. So we put our phones down for 1 hour and we have dinner. There's a tech-free day. Oftentimes that's a Sabbath. This is one that, candidly, I didn't have as many conversations about this with people, but boy, what if we could all spend a Sunday without our phones? Tech-free week is recommended in this wonderful book, and that will be a feature at our family vacation this summer, right? It's easy to have the devices with you and kind of put them down and try to stay away, but as a matter of policy, to actually work these rhythms of rest into our lives can be very helpful. All right, social media is very interesting. 3rd grade through 10th grade, typically it's never. 11th and 12th grade, again, you start to see some interesting moves. The general rule, I say, for many of the families that I talked to was no. A couple of the families do allow social media for their older children, right? They've gotten their driver's license, and they have an iPhone that's monitored, that's filtered. But one family required that social media app to be on the parent's phone, right? So you can be on social media, but the only place you can access that is on my phone. Again, that takes a level of trust, right? But that's what we're trying to build. So I think just some loose thoughts on social media. I mean, in general, there's that no, but we're so scared. I mean, it's tough to put down absolute rules because none of our children are like any other. Generally speaking, if you are going to allow it, look for an unusual amount of self-mastery in your son. And not only self-mastery in terms of his own desires, his own passions and the like, but also self-mastery in his ability to be honest with you about difficult things. So if he has that self-mastery and he has that self-knowledge, right? Self-knowledge meaning he can look into his heart and see whether or not the things that he's doing, the things he's consuming, are fulfilling that need. If he has that self-mastery, that self-knowledge, in that case, with a lot of parenting and a whole lot of grace, it's something that can go. And I can also imagine how a hard no without the relationship underlying it could actually backfire in some pretty difficult ways. So that's everything on phones. Quick words about routers and filters. This caveat, I've thrown it out again, but I'll do it another time. This is a quote from this book that I would highly recommend, The TechWise Family. If we build our family's technological life around trying to keep porn out, we will fail. Pornography saturates our society. Even if you somehow manage to never click on a not safe for work website, the path to health is not encasing our children in some kind of germ-free, sterile environment that they will inevitably try to flee. Rather, it's having healthy immune systems that equip us to resist and reject the things that don't lead to health. Now, in this book, this author does not give his high school children a browser, right? So he is putting some things in place, but he's pointing out that if all you do is put down limits, you're going to fail. So with that in mind, we've gone from relationship. From there, we've gone into routines, and now we go to the routers and the filters. The main takeaways on the routers and the filters, if you're not intentional, you're going to get into trouble. There's nothing that works out of the box. And, you know, it's sometimes our boys, like I said, wander off the farm. That's okay. We're there to accompany them and help them. All right, but routers. So all of us, most of us have a Verizon or an AT&T. Those routers do have a login function that you can log in. You can whitelist certain pages, meaning that your kids can only go to those pages, or you can make attempts to limit the pages in other ways. The problem is that those companies are not incentivized to provide you with the best service. So what many have found to be helpful is a freestanding router that's specifically built for parents. It's called the Griffin, and I've heard some good things about it. Chris McKenna at Protect Young Eyes is a huge fan. So the Griffin router. In addition, Bark Home, Bark is a service I'll talk about in a little bit. They have a plugin that you can use to plug into your router that can also be helpful, right? What does this let you do? Cut off Wi-Fi, set time limits on specific devices, whitelist certain pages, or all sorts of things. And so the Bark Home and the Griffin, those are both devices that were specifically built for you as parents, which is helpful. The next layer that I'd encourage us to think about is the domain name system, or DNS, which is essentially the DNS system is kind of like the phone book of the internet, right? When families ask where I work, I don't say 10400 Seven Locks Road. I say the Heights School, right? But how do you figure out where the Heights School is? Well, you go to the phone book or whatever, and you realize that the Heights School lines up with 10400 Seven Locks Road. So DNS is basically the system whereby www.espn.com is married up with the numbers address where that website actually lives in computer speak. And so if you get a good DNS filter, something like clean browsing, for example, would be a good service, clean browsing. What you do is you've essentially ripped out of your phone book all the unfortunate, less savory pages. So those addresses can be typed in, but the computer won't know where to go, and you will be told where your sons have been trying to go. So that's a DNS system. Finally, there are the filters, and these are things that can be associated with both devices and with accounts. One that I personally like a lot is called Bark, because with a good number of adolescents in my life, it's amazing just how much text and how much stuff can be produced. And so Bark is a system that actually uses AI to review your family's content, whatever it is that your family is producing, and then it sends you notifications if there's things that you should take a closer look at. You can also limit screen time on devices. It can filter, it can monitor texting, email, WhatsApp, Instagram, everything. So not that every family with Bark allows Instagram. To the contrary, oftentimes people with Bark use that just for texts, because texting by itself, especially those group texts, can be interesting places. But Bark is a really good service. Covenant Eyes is another one that many people are familiar with. So check out Covenant Eyes or Bark. And then finally, there's a new one called Canopy, which again uses AI to actually scan images and delete images from your child's phone as he's browsing that might have difficult content. So I'm not inclined towards that personally, but it's interesting, just all the different things that are out there. I will say that that was a whole lot of information. There are a lot of things to keep in mind, and I'm convinced that of all the families that are represented in this room, there is not one approach that's going to work for all of you. There's just not. But there is one thing that will work for all of you, and that is friendship. So I encourage you to please talk to people who know what they're doing. If you've got questions, jump into it yourselves and research it. It's actually kind of cool. Protect Young Eyes, again, is a great service. So just wrapping things up, to go back to relationships, I think buy-in is critical with your children. You want your children to feel not that they're just being controlled, although sometimes they are, and that's fine. You got to put your foot down, and it is what it is. But as they get older, to the extent that you can get them to buy in, that really becomes a beautiful process. Buy-in is critical, especially for our sons, not only for our sons, but very especially with our spouses. So for those of you that divided and conquered today, I can see myself here in this talk going home and saying, we're going to do everything differently. And that may be generating some tension. So be sure to be on the same page with the spouse. That's super important. I think we can also make digital life positive, right, by trying to be a participant in your child's digital life. What does that mean? Let's research something. Let's build a computer. Right? If you find your son trying to get around the limitations you've placed on his phone, hey man, do you like computer programming? Do you want to be like a tech security, cybersecurity expert? We need that, right? Let's take some coding classes and figure out how to hack into some systems. I don't know, maybe you wouldn't say that exactly, but just that idea that if you're seeing creativity, don't just squash it. Maybe find a way to direct it. I will say, and I saw this, I've known this in my own life to be profoundly true, both as a son and as a husband, and then I saw it in Childhood 2.0 from a detective, but a mother's intuition is almost completely infallible. So if you, probably one of the most important things, there's so many most important things today, one of the most important things is that if you as a mother sense that something's just not quite right, act on it. Pray, act, converse. We should all be aware the NMK syndrome, the not my kid syndrome. Yes, all of our children have concupiscence. All of our children are living in a very interesting age, and all of our children need to be accompanied. Another thing that I heard from a parent was to make your house the party house, right? It's great to say no to a lot of things that are difficult, but you have to just direct that energy into yeses. What are we saying yes to? Pope John Paul II said that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, it's that it shows too little. Right? So what can we show our sons as an alternative to that, right? And it's making your house a party house, making your house a place where teenagers truly feel comfortable, not because they're just kind of down in the basement hiding from the adults, but where they're welcomed into your space. Super, super important. Think again about our own example, right? Are you on your phone when your children wake up in the morning, right? Do they see you scrolling on your bed? Are you on your phone when you're cooking? Are you on your phone when you're in the passenger seat in the car? All these things are super important. Finally, some humorous ones. You will make mistakes. As parents, you will. And a couple of the families actually said you will definitely make mistakes with your first. So that's okay. Your sons will make mistakes, but your sons will thank you in the end. So I commented already, The TechWise Family, great book. A few podcasts that I'm happy to share with you if you email me. Childhood 2.0, really good for you as parents, difficult for boys to watch. Social Dilemma, really good to watch with your teen sons. Protect Young Eyes, and most importantly, your community, right? If you have children with some sort of psychological need, please let us know. We've got a wonderful network of people that we know. If you have no idea what you're doing with regard to tech, if you're totally clueless, call us, because we know people that can help you literally come to your house and help you set up these networks. So that is a whole lot of information. I hope it is helpful in some small way, shape, or form.